don't have to be the best. I've learned that. I'm definitely not the best at pretty much anything I do. I'm prepared to work harder than anybody else. I failed miserably many times. Just get up and just do it again and again and again. And here we are with a huge housing crisis and no clear route out of it. Doing the bigger deals, they definitely require a lot more consideration because there is a lot more risk. So I'm constantly almost obsessing over the idea that this could go wrong. How am I going to make sure it doesn't? I'm still a bit old school on this. It's still very much a people business.
Sure.
It's all about capital, all about creating capital and adding value. Well, raising finance is kind of like trying to grow a tree. The best time to do it is always today. You're not necessarily going to be able to pick the fruits from it today, but when you need to, you'll be thankful that you started all of that hard work when you did.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Property People. Today I am joined by Andy Graham. How are you today, Andy?
I'm good, Sam. Thank you for having me.
Good. I'm very excited about speaking with you because we met over a year ago now and spent some quality time with each other in Sheffield.
We did.
And everything that you're doing from the development to the HMO stuff is very interesting. But let me start with the intro. Andy, you are the founder and lead trainer of the HMO Roadmap. You've been investing in HMO properties for over a decade. And having started in 2009, you actually were qualified physio.
Yeah.
And you realized that not really for you. You saved up some money, bought your own 5-bed student house that you lived in, and then went out and did a whole bunch more in your local area of Sheffield. And then you built a wonderful community of other property investors, landlords in the HMO Roadmap, very much focused on HMOs. And you've also run and sold a lettings agency recently, whilst also running a mastermind in Sheffield, which I've benefited from, and I know lots of other people have as well. And if that wasn't enough, you've also part of a trio development company called ArcVelop, who are doing some wonderful designs across, I think around East Anglia, Southeast, and London. I don't know how you find the time to fit it all in, but we're incredibly excited to find out. But before we go into all of that, I'd like to know a little bit about yourself, about who you are, and more specifically about school, because I think those formative years and the kind of person you are at school sometimes gives me an idea of how the future unfolds in the way it does. So what kind of person were you at school? Did you always know you're going to be in property?
I definitely didn't know I was going to be in property. And the funny thing is, my dad was a teacher. So actually, I came from a family that was very academically orientated. And to be fair, and to give myself credit, I was pretty good at school, actually. And I enjoyed school, had lots of friends, loved sport. That was kind of my thing. Certainly at primary school, I would win the races on sports day. Not necessarily, the case at high school when I was in a much bigger pool, but still loved sport, rugby and all of that stuff. And I think I was just a good all-rounder. But I definitely didn't have any idea that I was going to go into property or business or anything else. I think the idea of something academic or medical, that was probably always there, and that felt like a fairly natural path. But mum and dad were great, and they were really supportive of everything that we did, but what they weren't was in any way pushy. They didn't sort of try and get me or my sister to do anything in particular, and that's great, but I think it left me at an age where I was sort of leaving college, a bit older, without any idea or haven't given it any real thought as to what I was actually going to do. I think when I decided to do the physio thing, it was probably lack of a better idea, in all honesty. But I loved those younger years, and I've still got all my pals from school. We're getting married this year, and some of those guys from primary school, some 4 or 5 years older, will be there at the wedding. And, actually that, I think was a very normal and great childhood. I couldn't have asked for any more.
Yeah, no, it does. That does sound. It's very similar to mine, actually. Grew up in a lovely area, got very supportive parents. I have friends from kind of childhood. But I always knew I was going to be in property, whereas you weren't really sure, and because you were kind of sporty, you decided like physio might be.
Yeah, exactly. Sporty. I kind of liked the sort of some of the medical stuff as well. I probably didn't have it in me to go and do medicine, but I also didn't want to work those sorts of hours. I had enough of an insight into that sort of
Yeah.
career choice to make that decision. But yeah, I had absolutely no idea. I think there was probably a seed that was sown at some point. My dad and my uncle was a builder, and
Mm.
they, when we were kids, they did some self builds, and I've got cousins of a similar age who I'm really close to, and my dad and my uncle, they would do self builds, and
Right.
we must have done 3 or 4 through our childhood, and
Sure.
I was sort of around the building sites, not really involved, and they weren't doing it to be developers or it just sort of made sense to them. They didn't have huge plans, and actually they've done, kind of finished what will probably be their last project now, and there's a really tragic story behind that, in that we lost my uncle as
Oh, no.
as these projects were finished, these incredible homes that they just moved into, and we lost my uncle just as they finished, and it was COVID, and it's terribly sad. But it's really nice to see dad and mum and my auntie sort of in there, and in what will probably be their sort of forever homes, and that is one hell of a kind of a legacy to look up to, and I do, and I think that the fact that they did that. My dad was a teacher, he was a head teacher, so very busy job, managed to do this on the side. That really inspired me. That work ethic was there. Dad was up at 5 o'clock,
Yeah.
driving to school, first in the school, last in school, every single day without question. Did the sports stuff, was there for all of the parent and PTA stuff. So I think that work ethic, that was definitely ingrained in me somewhere. I think that there's definitely a genetic element. I was happy to work, happy to graft at whatever I ultimately did decide to do.
So with that kind of approach as well, it's almost a certain that whatever you choose, eventually you're going to have some form of success at it. Because if you've got that work ethic and that kind of attitude and approach, things tend to fall your way. I think you make your own luck and all that sort of stuff.
I think I'm sort of 15 years into doing all of this property stuff, and I think the one key, and I say this to a lot of people, and I repeat this on my podcast regularly, the consistency piece is just the most important. You don't have to be the best. I've learned that. I'm definitely not the best at pretty much anything I do, but I'm prepared to work harder than anybody else at it, and I'll just keep going until I get the result. I'll learn, and I see every experience as a learning opportunity.
Absolutely.
I failed miserably many times, but I've still managed to enjoy the process, and I just get up and just do it again and again and again.
Yeah, that makes sense. Saying comes to mind is that you never lose, you only win or learn, and that resilience and that consistency pushing forward. Something question though, that I don't know, some curiosity. What your dad was a teacher? What was he teaching?
So he was a PE teacher and a geography teacher,
Ah, okay.
and he did that in the early days of his career, and then he went up, sort of did pastoral, sort of head of year, deputy,
Got it.
headship, and then actually he moved into what's called an executive headship, which is the responsibility of a couple of or a few head teachers in different schools, and those schools would be typically struggling schools that are really underperforming, schools that need a lot of help and support, and there's sort of government intervention. So it's really quite important that the right person goes into those roles to try and get things like the A to C's up to a level that that the government needs.
So, I mean, that's interesting as well. My crossover as well. My mum was a school teacher, but she did primary mainly, and she did kind of move up. She never had the aspiration to be a head because she didn't want the hassle of it. But the fact that your old man was that's kind of a managerial position. That's serious position where
Huge.
So that was maybe kind of rubbed off on you as well, that you wanted to kind of work up the ladder and be at the top of the tree.
I just saw him work really hard. He had a huge amount of responsibility. Never, I've never seen dad shy away from that. And it's funny because behind closed doors now, loves cooking, and we're so similar. You see me out with the dog all the time. Every day out with the dog, and every weekend whenever we can. That's my thing. My life is as simple as that, but I definitely get that from dad. So he went to work and had all this responsibility, and I can't even imagine how much responsibility. I mean, tenants is one thing, right? But managing, a staff of 100 people And Dad would always say the staff are actually the most challenging
More
element,
than the kids.
more than the kids.
Jesus.
And he would tell me some of the stories, and some of them would shock you. And of course, you've got challenges with the kids and the kids' parents, and then you've got
Yeah.
inspections and Ofsted and
The
all the
government as well.
politics, and you've got huge multi-million-pound budgets. So actually, sometimes we chat, and I kind of think about how much responsibility he had, and I guess I definitely do want to be able to sort of take on that sort of responsibility myself, perhaps in a different way. And I've seen Dad do it, and really respect what he's done, and I've looked up to that and his work ethic, for as long as I can remember.
Well, it's definitely rubbed off in the right way. But with your first property that you decided to buy, like, how did that come about? Where were you living before that, and how did that all work out?
Well, I was living in Cornwall at the time, so I'd finished university, got my physio degree, and it was 2009. So actually, the employment market was pretty poor, and around Sheffield, we were surrounded by Manchester University, Leeds, Nottingham, all these other universities that were churning out graduates with the same degree as me. So actually, it was highly competitive, and it was inevitably going to be quite difficult in 2009 to get a junior job as a physio. There was actually an employment freeze in the NHS. So I made the decision just to go straight down to Cornwall. I like things like the mountains, I love to surf and all that stuff. So I thought, it makes sense. I'll just go down to the mountains. Didn't really care too much about what that might mean. Was quite happy to just leave Sheffield for a while. So that was the plan, and I went down there. But obviously, that seed that had been sown at whatever time, and it was probably exacerbated, catalyzed by going up to see my sister, who's a few years younger than me, at university. So I got down to Cornwall. I would go up to see her a little bit, and she was around Nottingham. And it just dawned on me, I'd paid all this money to live in a student house, which was just terrible. And my sister was living in a student house and paying all this money with her friends to live in a student house. And it was okay. And I'd see my dad and my uncle do these self-builds, and that was how we'd been able to live in a nice house. And I just thought, there's got to be something there. And I liked the idea of just buying my own property. There wasn't much more to it than that, though. And it sounds daft now, and especially the way I think and look at projects now. There was no analysing numbers. There was no spreadsheet. There was no thinking about the tenant demographics. I just thought, there are students here, and I could put 5 of them in this house. And it was that simple, and this is what it's going to cost. And I knew nothing else about it. Didn't know anything about the regulations, so I really just jumped head first in, which tells you a lot about me, actually. I'm definitely not afraid to give most things a go, and I do like to go pretty fast and pretty hard.
Even on ski slopes,
especially on the ski slope. That's where I enjoy things more than anything. But there's definitely a bit of a sort of a crossover and sort of translation. That some of that does find its way into business.
I was just everything you were saying. I was thinking, bloody hell, you did that on the ski slope.
Yeah, and I made it work. And I think actually, there's a lot of value in just getting stuck into stuff. I think we can overcomplicate it, and I think there's a lot of advice out there, and that can overwhelm us. And sometimes it's really not that complicated. If you can buy a house that looks like reasonable, or good value, and you can do something to it, and you've got the money or the budget to do it, and you've got a sensible plan as to kind of what you're going to do at the end of that, it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. And that's what I did. It wasn't the sort of project that you see now with state of the art, features and all these great designs. It was really just a nice 5-bed house. And I still have that house now. And I bought it in 2009. So we're sort of 13, 14 years on, something like that. And I've gone in and done one periodic upgrade, but it's still got the same kitchens, same bathrooms. It's still the same floor space. And it still makes me a lot of money.
And the rent's gone up since?
The rents have gone up, so's the interest on the mortgage. Yeah. Although, to be fair, over the last sort of decade or so more, that's fluctuated.
Yeah.
It has been incredibly cheap and very, very profitable over the last 3-4 years. I think the fix I'm in right now is still 1.7%, to give you an idea. And that's coming to an end this July, which is fine and was always to be expected.
It was a good run. Yeah.
It was a great. And look, that property wasn't a million miles off my junior salary as a physio.
Right.
It wasn't quite there, but it wasn't that far off. And it's only got better every single year. And of course, it's doubled in value. It has literally more than doubled in value. So that all helped and sort of, I suppose, the idea of doing more matured as I started to learn from that one, and I suppose reap some of the rewards of it. And it took me time to get the next one. I didn't have money, and I didn't have all these grand ideas about raising finance. I had no idea how to do that, or that it was even possible. So I just saved up a bit more money, borrowed a bit more money off dad. I saved up pretty much everything that I could from work and my rent, and I just did the same again. I mean, and to give you a bit of context here, the first property I bought, that one that we've just discussed, was about £100,000. So incredibly cheap now. It felt expensive at the time,
Sure.
but the banks were quite lenient actually as well. It's different. It is a little bit different now, and that's being quite honest. It was easy to get the lending. They didn't need the landlord experience. There weren't all these hoops to jump through.
Stress testing and all that stuff.
No, and I sort of look back and, one thing that I do give myself credit for as well is just giving stuff a go. Like you with the podcast and me with the podcast, just giving it a go. It might not work, and that's fine. But with just getting stuck into the property stuff, it did it, and it did work. And I suppose I learned a lot just from that experience.
Absolutely. My old man always says that in your 20s and 30s, you can afford to make mistakes. But I just turned 40 a few weeks ago, and he was like, "Sam, you can't make any mistakes now. Like, you've had your chance." But yeah, I think when you're at that age, you got to just try things, see what happens, and you've got plenty of time to kind of recover if things don't go quite your way. One of the things, though, that has been, we were just talking about it briefly before we kind of started recording, is regulation and how significant that's become, not just even for HMOs, but just buy-to-let sector in general, the private rented sector. What's your take on that? And do you ever see it improving or deregulating?
Yeah, I actually do think a period of deregulation is likely and probably necessary. I think what has happened is all these great ideas, and I think on the most part they have been done with the right intentions in mind, but they've strangled the rental sector, the PRS, and I think that has had this domino effect. It's ultimately landed on the tenant's lap, and here we are with a huge housing crisis and no clear route out of it, and that's a big problem. It's a huge problem for everybody. So, I think it's the HMOs are particularly regulated, and I think the regulation around improving the housing standards is good. And actually, it's not that expensive. It's not that expensive to comply with things like HMO licensing, and and health and safety bits and pieces,
Fire and all that.
Yeah, and I'm totally on board with that. But I could give you some examples, things like AML and anti-money laundering for my business, things like that where a lack of common sense is applied to very sort of normal and everyday scenarios that make it incredibly difficult to trade. It makes it very expensive. You've got to pay huge amounts. It really frustrates me that I have to go and pay for an ILA every time I need to get a new mortgage, which is quite often, and they're quite expensive to do, and it takes time. And I think there are simpler ways and cheaper ways to do a lot of things, but of course the banks are spooked and they've been made to do all these things. So it's something that's got to change, in my opinion.
And what about things like the Renters Reform Act?
I mean, where do I begin? Where do you want me to start with that? Done with the right intentions, protect the tenants. There are unscrupulous landlords out there. There's no doubt about that, and that needs to be controlled. But I don't think pushing all of this stuff on all of the good landlords, which by far is the majority, and if you look at all the surveys, that data is very, very clear. 85% plus tenants are happy with their accommodation and happy with their landlords. You know what the worst accommodation is and the worst landlord is? It's the council, and it's the council-owned accommodation. I don't think putting all of this pressure onto private landlords, who on the most part do a good job, is going to help. It's not going to dissuade, in my opinion, the bad landlords from being bad landlords.
Yeah.
I think what we need is more enforcement, and I think we should invest more into those services so that councils can enforce the bad landlords and get them out of the market. But I think there are some very short-sighted ideas, very politically minded. It is short-term politics, and that's a very dangerous place to be. And it does worry me a little bit that this is where we're going as as a society, and I do wonder where this will end as we're speaking now. It looks highly likely that we're going to be looking at a Labour government in the future. That really scares me.
Yeah, and they got rent controls and a whole bunch of other stuff that
Where do you,
yeah.
where do you start with that? So there's a lot of really worrying stuff there, and we will all adapt. I have no doubt about that, but
Mm.
it doesn't necessarily mean that it will be in the best interest of everybody, other
Yeah,
than perhaps the people making the policies.
I happen to agree. I mean, maybe this is the worst, but like not a great podcast to have any kind of well, we've got slightly subjective views. It could be argued, but I think if you try and look at it objectively and look at the data, and as you say, I was quite an interesting statistic that the least favorite landlord out there is the council, and when you look around the kind of stock that they're
Are
giving
you
people,
surprised?
not surprised at all. It's like, what are you building and where are you putting people? It's totally understandable. Um, I do think that there's a pendulum swing, which is where the regulation comes in. Some landlords have had an easy ride, and some of them are slumlords, for want of a better word. And so some of these regulations to increase living standards, etc., have been great, minimum space standards,
Yep,
etc.
totally agree.
I just think that it has gone too far. And eventually it'll swing back. So the ones that stay in the market, once it swings back, will hopefully have a really easy ride. But you've just sold the lettings business. Is that because of, did you get out that market because of all this regulation?
In part, because of the direction of travel.
Yeah.
I saw it getting increasingly difficult to trade. It's got so much more expensive to run a profitable agency. Volume is key. It's not, it's not a business model with big margins. We did a lot of rent to rent. We had some great guaranteed contracts and we had big leases. Really, really profitable stuff, and that works if you do it right. If you know how to do it right. But your everyday standard management, it's tough. It's hard work, lots of moving parts. You've got challenges in the labour market, so it is a difficult business model. The saving grace has been that there's a huge demand for accommodation, so it was never difficult. It hasn't been difficult in the last 5-6 years
Yeah.
to fill accommodation. But it wasn't just that for me. It was the right time. There was a lot of factors for me. It was a business that I built from scratch. It required everything I had, to be honest, and I had to put everything else on pause: relationships, other investment plans, building my own portfolio to focus on the business. And that's what I did. And we raised a lot of money to do that, and we built the business, and it was just the right time this year to sell that for me. I've got other things going on in other businesses, and I think we were at a point where we probably needed, or I probably needed, to reinvest a lot of time and money in the business to take it to the next level. And I was just honest with myself. I had a chat with Gemma and said, like, I'm probably not the right person to take it into the next chapter. And I sold it to a great guy, somebody I knew from my own network, and it's allowing me to crack on with the other stuff that I had brewing away that I'm ready to focus more on.
Would you ever consider selling the HMO portfolio that you've got?
No. Well, everything's for sale at the right price.
Yeah.
So you tell me what the offer is, Sam. But no, I think, look, I'm a big believer in sort of making your money in business now, and I've learned that, and probably the harder way. Actually, I didn't start like that. I started by buying, and I bought more, but actually over time my focus has become more so on business and building businesses, and those businesses have generated cash, and that cash can actually be taken to invest in assets. And actually I've learned that that is by far the easiest, quickest, best way to build an asset-based portfolio. And I sometimes think about what I could probably sell them for, maybe go off and do other things, but then I always revert back to the fact, well, what would I do with that money? I drive a Volvo. We live in a 3-bed semi. We're perfectly happy with everything that we have at the minute, and actually we don't feel like we need other things. Certainly not now. So actually, it makes sense to just keep building that portfolio and enjoy it while I can.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I think it was funny. My missus was talking to me about pensions, and she got, somebody sent her something, and I said, I'm not going to spend my time looking at this right now. I've got my pension plan, which I'm trying to build this portfolio, and any time that I invest in this is just going to kind of go over my head, and I'm not really interested right now. The properties in the long run, whilst they give you some short-term income, and hopefully you've got a decent yield and a decent margin, the long-term capital growth hopefully will also bear plenty of fruit by the time we hit retirement age. So
I'm sure it will, and certainly if you plan to hold long enough.
yeah,
I think you've got to remember that property is a long game. We can often be short-sighted ourselves, and you know, long term, property is very forgiving. We're struggling with inflation at the minute, but actually that inflation is eroding the debt. So if you've got a mortgage, actually inflation is just eroding that, and that's a really good thing. 5-10 years time, let's see what your £200,000 mortgage looks like relative
yeah,
to what £200,000 really is at that point in time.
exactly.
Inflation on rent at the minute, it's significant. So for me, I still can't think of a better place to put that money, assuming that the management element is all kind of taken care of, because that's the flip side of property, right? It can be hard. You've got to actually look after that asset and keep it.
Especially with HMOs as well. I've got single lets as well, and they're so easy at the end of the month when you're doing like bookkeeping. It's kind of like rent coming in and interest, and that's it really. When you've got HMOs, you've got all of the other costs that come in, and then you've got like 5 different tenants paying you potentially, or more if you've got larger HMOs. And then it's all the chasing of every little bit. And if you want, we've had a funny conversation about utility companies
Yeah.
and the stress that they can cause. It can make a really good person into not a good person at times.
I had a meeting before coming here this afternoon, with a friend of mine who owns a lot of student stuff, and he owns a particularly large HMO, so it's a sort of a purpose-built student block, and his utility bill on the block went up last year from 60,000 to 220,000.
60,000 to 220,000. That's like fourfold nearly.
So give you an idea of how significant. I mean, when you look at it on a HMO, it stings a bit. It's gone up. We were fixed in at about £350, £380 ish on all of the 5 beds. And that included the Wi-Fi and the TV license. And when that goes up to £600, it stings a bit. But actually, I don't think we really understand just how significant that energy crisis has been and still continues to be. It's really, really quite scary, actually, for a lot of people and for a lot of businesses and for a lot of big building owners. It's a scary
Is that
place.
because that's a commercial asset, so they haven't had it capped in the same way that we're consumers? Maybe is that something?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh my days! I'm not. That's maybe
Combined with maybe a cold winter,
Oh my God.
and some naughty tenants, opening the windows and turning the heat on, But if you've got 60 or 80 or 100 of them in the building doing that, then it can soon rack up.
Jesus. HMOs. I mean, because of all these things, and pretty much like Article 4 is a thing almost in all the top spots across the country. Are HMOs dead? Are HMOs done? Are HMOs saturated? Is it kind of time to start thinking anew?
Well, maybe if I say yes, it'll deter everyone else from buying them. So it might be in my interest to say yes, HMOs are dead, but I am feeling more confident about HMOs now than I ever have done. I think the rental crisis that we've got is fueling a demand for more accommodation. We're clearly not, as a nation, going to be able to deliver that by building new homes. HMOs is a solution to easing part of this problem. It's definitely not the solution, but it is definitely a way of helping it. So I think from a demand point of view, it looks very, very good. I think from a returns point of view, where else are you going to put your money? Show me maybe an SA, but we know we know what's coming there. We're just looking, we're in the crosshairs of the government now. They're bringing planning permission in and restrictions on SA. So for me, I still can't see where you're going to get a better return if you're going to go into property than in HMOs. We're talking about rental yield. Developing and adding capital value is slightly different, but no, I think the HMO market looks stronger than it ever has done at the moment. And I think we're going through a turbulent period, and I'm hopeful and quite confident that actually interest rates will find their way back down, and so will utility prices. I don't expect we'll be back where we were a couple of years ago, but as rents have gone up, I think we'll find about the same net position.
Yeah, again, it's always this like squeeze and contract and expand. And I think right now we're in a bit of a squeeze. We're in a contraction where all of our margins are being squeezed. But that was the whole benefit of doing HMOs from the get-go, is that if you did have interest rates go up, and if you did have utility bills go up, and something like, you would still have a break-even point or a little profit or maybe a little loss, but because the yield was always so good, and that's actually starting to like transpire exactly how I envisaged it anyway. So it is good, and I'm now looking though for more HMOs because it's kind of worked for me, like the ones that I've got. And I genuinely believe as well that young professionals coming out of university, co-living's kind of been a phrase that's been coined. I think that people want to live in small spaces still in a little community where they don't have to worry about bills. They don't have to worry about all that. They can just come and go in 6, 12 months. It's a stepping stone into maybe being in a relationship. And so I think it still has huge benefit as well. And I think that a lot of the PBSA stuff or the larger co-living kind of developments have certain attractions. Some of them have got gyms and this, that, and the other. But I think people generally like to live in kind of 5, 6 bedrooms, little smaller groups as well. So I'm a big fan as well.
I've seen some with hot tubs now, which
They,
I know I'm all for, making the HMOs great, but for me there's a line to draw, and I think it is at hot tubs.
oh my days.
I'm not, yeah, and I've got a lot of student tenants as well, right? So
I don't, you know what? Why stop there? Like, if you can, I think it's great. I think just generally everybody should have the most luxurious life that we can humanly afford. And so, why not? As long as it's within the budget and the guy's making money, the landlord or whatever.
as long as I'm not, it's not my job to clean the hot tub.
Yeah,
that's fine. But I totally agree. The transient nature of young people now,
yeah.
it lends itself to the sort of accommodation that we provide in HMOs for sure.
Yeah, exactly. This episode is sponsored by the PLMD Group. PLMD Group is made up of the PLMD Development, PLMD Estate Management, and PLMD Capital, providing expertise in real estate development combined with asset management. With more than 70 build-to-rent properties and £20 million of assets under management, PLMD's extensive knowledge of local planning policies have resulted in a strong track record, turning liabilities into valuable assets. The group delivers value through a fusion of experience, innovative design, imagination, hands-on management, and sustainable resources. To find out more about PLMD and the services they offer, head to plmdgroup.co.uk. With the portfolio that you've got, which is all in and around Sheffield?
No, it's actually predominantly my student portfolios around Nottingham. I still keep my actual portfolio quite private. Been a bit more public about the business and the management business over the years. But I have bought HMOs in Sheffield, in Manchester, over in Chester,
really?
in Leicester, so across several cities. And actually my wider portfolio of single lets, which are in blocks of flats there elsewhere in the country as well, actually. So
Okay, so because the development stuff, which is with Arc Velop, that's also not necessarily in Sheffield. That's a bit further afield. So you're, because I always hear two schools of thought generally. Some people are like, I want to be literally able to see it from my window whilst I'm watching TV, the properties. I want to be able to throw a stone as far. And some people are like, no, I don't mind where it is in the country as long as I can make it stack. I've got systems and processes. And it seems like you're the latter then.
well, you can make it work wherever you are. There's definitely a consideration. So with the HMOs, I do like to be close to the HMOs. Don't necessarily want them to be on my doorstep.
Yeah.
I think there is actually a problem in that. You're almost sort of someone's back and call, they give you a call. They expect you can just pop over every 10 minutes. And the inclination is, if you're a good landlord, you will just drive over on a Saturday night and and just sort the loose door handle. And that's not necessarily a good thing, because I think it needs to be managed properly.
It's not very scalable doing it like that.
It's not. But the other stuff that I buy, for example, the blocks that we develop and have, some of those are in the southeast. We've actually just secured our first one in Sheffield as well, actually.
Oh, well done. Congrats.
Yeah, which is really exciting. But I've got business partners, and between us, we can manage that element in the same way. So my business partner is close enough. We'll still use a property manager. We're not going to self-manage these sorts of things. And actually, we have no inclination. We're busier building them and actually sort of planning and trying to acquire the next one and so on and so forth. So I think you can make it work. I like to be close-ish, within reason. But if you're going to do it from far afield, and there are some great examples, and some people have been on my podcast actually, and they've invested from different countries and made it work.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Just lots of systems and lots of processes, some really reliable contacts, good relationships, but you can make it work.
And tell us about the relationship with the Arc Develop guys and how that was all formed. Because it's really important who you pick to work with and how that all came about. And I think a lot of other people, they network and they meet somebody and they want to do a joint venture. Some of them go wrong. But what you guys have got going on, it seems really special. So how did that all come about?
It is really special, yeah. And I think the whole thing has been quite fortuitous for all of us. So Arc Develop Investor Group is actually who we are. And that's myself and Mark Turnier. Mark's an architect, and Mike Clay. And Mike's sort of former role was sort of director at Kia, big national construction firm, sort of really high-flying corporate role, but didn't want to spend a lot of time with their kids. So I actually met Mark and Mike separately, and they came and did some mentorship with me. They did my fast track program. Both of them were thinking about investing in HMOs for different reasons, with very different agendas, but that's what it was. And we did some work together, and they went off and did their thing, and continued to sort of work with them. Mike went off and bought 16 HMOs, just absolutely smashed it out of the park. And if you knew Mike, he's incredibly focused, very consistent, very logical, and very good at raising finance and just making things happen. And that's what he's done. And Mark's objectives were a little bit different. Mark had these professional skills and sort of wanted to actually apply them more so to his own projects rather than other people's projects. And so we talked about those ideas and worked on that together. And off Mark went and sort of started to do that. But we continued to work together, became very good friends, and actually Mike and Mark joined my mastermind.
Okay.
I think they were on a year or two before you joined it. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, they got to know each other on there, and the more time we spent together, and it was definitely a timing thing for us, right? Because when I first met them, I was really busy building my businesses, and they were busy doing their things. And actually, several years down the line, these relationships had matured, and it was just a very natural fit. It was like, well, actually, we've got some cash and we've got these skills, and we could do it here and there and there. And how about we just do this together?
Wow, so it's very organic. It was just like through conversation, through spending time with each other, one thing led to another.
Yeah. Mark and I did a first deal together. I put the cash in, and Mark sort of did all the planning, and he's incredible at that. Got the planning, developed it out. And Mike actually came in and part financed that as well. He was interested in getting involved, more so for his interest than anything else. So we did it, and it all went well. And then I was like, why don't we just do this, together and sort of collectively own this? And we could probably do this in, London, the southeast, and we could probably do it in Norwich, and we could probably do it in Sheffield. And off we went. And that has become a huge focus now, and it's moving very, very quick. It's really, really exciting. I've not at all put the HMOs down or to the side. It's just a different strategy for me, and it's all about capital, all about creating capital and adding value.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the division of labor, let's say, do you have very clearly defined roles? Is there a lot of crossover?
We do to an extent, but there's definitely crossover as well. So Mark has these professional skills, really great architect, fantastic designer, understands the planning process. And the skills that Mike and I have are quite different. Mike comes from a corporate background. He's got all of these skills that come from being in a corporate role like that, managing lots of people, managing huge budgets. And my skills very much property management, scaling small businesses to particular levels, raising lots of finance. I've done a huge amount of that over the years in my business and in my portfolio. And that combination is a good mix.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
we could all do this in our individual areas as well. So we could apply those skills as a collective in these 3 locations, and that meant we could scale up much more quickly. If we could scale up more quickly, we can bring more resources in, and there was a compounding effect that we thought and has ultimately sort of washed out at the back of this.
And in terms of the ability to find sites, because you are fairly spread out, you're looking at Sheffield, you're looking at kind of East Anglia, Norwich way, London, South East. How do you go about kind of where are you going to invest next? Do you have a patch because you're obviously based in Sheffield? Is there any specific approach to that? Do you go look at auctions? You look at on the market, direct to vendor? How do you go about finding your sites?
Well, the approach is actually, where do we get the finance for the next deal? Once we get the finance, we can go and find the deal. That's a bit easier. So actually, we're more so focused on where the finance for the next project is coming from.
So it's like age old chicken and egg or in property, money or deal, which one comes
Yeah, I'm on the
first?
money. Yeah,
And you're on the
I'm on the
money
money
side. I'm on
side.
the money side as well.
Yeah,
I because obviously if you go and find the site and you haven't got the money, what's not much good to you.
exactly. And for us, a lot of that relies on our private network of investors, which hasn't happened overnight. There's over a decade's worth of sort of time and
Yeah.
work and experience gone into that, which is now incredibly useful. But we're always really focused on that bit. But then we do, of course, have to go out and find the deals. Myself and Mark and Mike, we handle that in our own areas. And actually, a lot of the stuff that we get comes from fairly close knit networks of agents in the commercial world, and we're buying exclusively commercial buildings, warehouses, factories, those sorts of things. They tend to move around in slightly different circles. They do come on Rightmove, and they do come on online portals and things like that. But actually, with the right reputation, and if you know who, sometimes you get a first shot at something, or you can get your foot in the door. And I say this in it, as if this is the case every time, and that we're getting off market deals. We're really not, but we're just being the opportunities are being highlighted to us. They're bringing them. They're not bringing them exclusively to us by any means. The one that we've just secured in Sheffield, the day I viewed it, there were 50 other parties viewing it,
Right.
quite literally 50. And the agent said, "Andy, don't trip up on your way in." But I think what's important is he said, "Andy, don't trip on the way in."
Yeah.
He knew me, and we had that relationship. And I'm still, a bit old school on this. It's still very much a people
Yeah,
business.
sure.
The right people will help you, and there's no doubt at all that getting that secured was certainly assisted by that relationship we had. And we hadn't actually bought from this particular agent, but we tried to buy several times, and we'd just not been on the mark a few times because our numbers weren't there. But we did it all in the right way, and we had that rapport there.
It's that consistency again, going back to it, just always showing up, being pleasant to be around as well, so that people want to work with you, even if something hasn't. And then you get that, as you say, a little bit of a head start, a little bit of a heads up, and people will want to urge you to get the offer accepted over somebody else potentially, which is all you can do really at the end of the day. You can increase your chances.
I think good people want to do and see good things for other people, and I try and do that myself for other people in our own community. And yeah, I think we've definitely found that has been the case for us. And the more we do, the more deals that seem to come out of the woodwork. And there is no real magic sauce to it, but I think it is just good old fashioned hard work, getting really stuck in. And I'm just a huge believer, that activity creates, results.
And it's funny, the property development. I remember, being young and thinking kind of construction and seeing something coming out the ground. That was property development. That's one part of it. But it's let's call it the most Instagrammable stuff. So Mark does an amazing job with your designs because these schemes look so sexy, so attractive. But there's so many different elements to property development, and one of the things you mentioned was raising the finance. So raising private finance. What are some top tips that you would probably share with somebody that's going out there trying to raise finance? And what are some of the biggest mistakes that you try to avoid?
Well, raising finance is kind of like trying to grow a tree. The best time to do it is always today. You're not necessarily going to be able to pick the fruits from it today, but when you when you when you need to, you'll be thankful that you started all of that hard work when you did. So for me, I could take the idea of raising private finance back to quite literally 2012 when I first got on social media, got involved in the community, kind of built my own network outside my private sort of family and friend network. I think a lot of people make the mistake of believing that they can just at the click of their fingers go and find finance, and it's really not that easy because it's all about people.
Yeah.
People invest in people, and yes, a good deal helps, and being able to give them the security really helps. But actually, it's about the person, and I. And it might surprise a lot of people, but don't particularly like being behind the camera or behind the mic. I'd actually much prefer not to do it. I'm quite shy, but I recognized very early on that by doing it, it would help other people see me. And that was going to be a much easier way than trying to kind of wade through the crowd and ask everybody, are you an investor? Would you lend me some money? Are you an investor? Would you lend me some money? If I could find a way to stand on the stage and they knew who I was, it was going to be much easier to communicate that message to everybody. And over the years, that has really helped us raise a lot of finance, helped me raise finance in the business and the portfolio, now in Art Develop Investor Group. I think it's also really important to have a good brand and image. I think that really does help. I think identification, USP is really clear. So in AIG, where the design element's really important to us, and that kind of aesthetic thing, that's part of our USP, and we really try and show people that. And we do make tangible documents like investor decks and our online channels. It's very strategic and it's very well thought. It's not accidental when we end up bringing an investor on. It is a multifaceted approach. But yeah, the mistakes I see, the biggest one is people thinking that they can go and raise finance quickly and
Find the deal and you'll find the money.
yeah, and I just sometimes you can, but I don't think that those relationships are necessarily the ones that have the longevity that you really want to find
Yeah,
in a
exactly.
game that is primarily about time in the market.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. I think I get that a lot actually because I love asking the question of like, especially people that are a little bit earlier in their journey, in their investment career. I always ask them, what do you think comes first, the deal or the money? And so many of them say the deal because if you've got something of value, then you'll find the money, and it kind of makes sense, and you probably will, and possibly will find somebody to do it. And if you do, great, but is that person the kind of person that you want to be stuck, in a deal with that probably has a lot of teeth in your deal as well? And if you step out of line, will probably take everything from you, and then you've wasted your time.
You've got to be really careful. Talking about big sums of money for investors, it could be part of their pension, their kids' inheritance, and I think there's a huge responsibility that we've got to take very seriously. I think one of the other things when it comes to raising private finance, and I've learned this over the years, is confidence. I think most savvy investors see through the bullshit,
True.
and confidence in inability is really, really important. Investors do want to know that their money is safe. I don't think you necessarily have to have all the experience in the world. I'm certainly not the most experienced developer in the world, but when we sit down with investors and we can show them where the security is and what the exit route is, we're beyond I'm happy and comfortable investing with you, but let's now look at the project piece. That confidence element's got to be there, and that means you've really got to know your onions. You have to know what you're doing, and I think this is another mistake a lot of people make. They jump from a single buy to let to I'm going to do a 12-unit commercial development, and I've never done a planning application or don't really know what
Yeah.
it's like to develop something out that's 5, 6, £700,000, and there's an awful lot to learn there. And I'm not saying it can't be done, but combining the two, an experience like that or a lack of experience with something like that with private finance or a lack of raising private finance, that can be tough to pull together. I think start as you mean to go on, but learn to walk before you can run.
Yeah, exactly. Start small, think big, I always say, because I think that you're gonna, especially if you're using other people's money. I don't know. For me, I feel a little bit more responsible when I've got the bank's money or private investors' money. It's like I don't want to be on the hook for that. If I lose my own money, it'll be a terrible day, terrible week, terrible year, terrible memory. But if I'm losing other people's money, I just start to feel even worse about it. Especially if you've got credit scores on the thing, especially on the finance space. I see so many people that have messed up their credit and they've got a diminished number of options available to them, and it's only because they were a little bit lackluster about a certain decision that they could have really avoided if they just had a little bit something more about them.
I think it's the idea of not repaying an investor on the terms that you agree is, for me, just unacceptable. And I'm really kind of quite passionate about that, to the point where if a refinance is coming in late and it's going to be a day late, I will find that money from somewhere else to pay my investor back on time. I'm not going to ask them for that extra day. I feel really quite passionate about the responsibility of doing what we say we're going to do.
Absolutely. And the thing is, I mean, I always kind of wrestle with this in my mind because raised private finance, but I want to do more of it going forward potentially. But I don't know. I think that you're putting your money up in a position where it's going to get a reward, but there's also risk attached, and you can lose it all. And as long as everybody's on the same page with that, and for the best intentions, things can go pear-shaped and they can go to zero. It just is a fact of life. Otherwise, there'd be no reward at the end of the rainbow. But like that, if it's going to be a day late, you're thinking, why am I going to test this relationship when I could just probably kind of make good, and then I'll manage my cash flow effectively, stuff like that.
The risk piece that you just mentioned, Sam, it was funny coming from the station down here. I thought I better have a think about what Sam might ask me today. And I'm not used to, I'm usually on the other side of the mic and asking the questions. And I better have a think. And I was thinking about what I think are perhaps some of the qualities or sort of characteristics that one might need, or certainly that I found one needs to build a property business and a successful one. Thinking that risk might come up, and I thought a lot about risk on the way over here. And I talked about this in a presentation I gave at the HMO Awards last year. Risk, and I've had the good fortune of having met and been able to interview and speak to lots of people who've done incredible things. But I think risk is one of the key things that people in our game underestimate. We know about the risk and reward ratio, but I think sometimes we sort of say it and talk about it flippantly. What I've found is that it is materially linked. I mean, doing the bigger deals, they definitely require a lot more consideration because there is a lot more risk. And I think if you imagine looking at a chart, on one side you've got a graph, on one side you've got sort of the reward, on the other side you've got the risk, and then you've got all these deals scattered on that page. You're going to find most of them in the middle there. An average amount of risk for an average reward. The exciting stuff is at the far end, right up in that top right corner.
Racy stuff, yeah.
And my approach to everything in business has always been about, right, okay, well, this is where I want to be, and this is where I'm going to get the best return on my efforts. But how do I control that risk? How do I try and get that reward, but bring that risk down? And there's lots of ways to do it. One is know your onions. Really understand your trade, which is why for me, I've pretty much not done anything but HMOs. I certainly didn't for over a decade.
Just like property, HMOs is my thing within that.
And just learned everything I could and met everybody I could that would be able to help me and make that process easier. And moving on to other types of deals and other businesses, getting a mentor for me. It was a really critical part of my business journey. JP is my mentor. He's been on my show a number of times, owns a big sort of chain of estate agents. And he taught me a huge amount. And he was that sort of shoulder to lean on when things weren't going well, which is exactly when you need people like that around. So there are lots of ways of managing risks that can help you sort of achieve what you want by doing less, but you've got to be incredibly strategic about it. You've really got to figure out what those risks are and how you're going to mitigate them. And I spend a lot of time poring over those sorts of details, really to the nth degree. At the end of a project, what if the valuer comes and says that actually the rent's this, and then we get stress tested, and actually then the valuation is whatever, and all of a sudden we haven't really got the capacity in the deal to pay all of the funds back. What are we going to do? What's plan B? What's plan C? I think that's really important, and I think there's a saying, about property developers. It's not, it's not if, it's when you go bust, right? I don't want to be that guy, so I'm constantly almost obsessing over the idea that this could go wrong. How am I going to make sure it doesn't? And people don't necessarily see that. That doesn't necessarily come through on Instagram and on the podcast and through the Facebook group and stuff. But for me, that is, as much as raising the private finance and finding the right projects, that for me is a constant presence.
Yeah, it's not about taking risks, it's about minimizing them. And like you said, knowing your onions, and being very, very vigilant constantly, and almost paranoid is not a good word, because that's almost like a unjustifiable fear. It's just, I think, being aware of what can go wrong, and making sure at every step of the way you've done something to mitigate it. That's the only way to stay, I think, on the right side of the profit margin. And you mentioned a few other things as well with regard to the HMO awards and the mastermind and the HMO roadmap. These are all very much kind of community building initiatives that you do. As I really benefited from the mastermind. I thought it was a fantastic
Thank you, Sam.
cohort of people. Some of those people I'm still working with, which I'm incredibly thrilled as well, because I get to feel like I'm still part of a great community. But there's something actually quite fun about building a community from my point of view. That's, I think, what we're trying to do here with Property People as well. How did you get involved in that? And now with the HMO awards and the mastermind, like, how did you get drawn into all of that? And are you enjoying it as well? Is that one aspect of property investment that gets you motivated?
It is, for me, the most enjoyable part. Mastermind every month is my favorite day of the month. And it's because I get to sit in a room of good people who I know and like and care about and talk about property. and I love that. And look, it would be disingenuous of me to sit here and talk about things like the roadmap and the masterminds and my other sort of things without saying, yes, there's definitely financial benefits to doing that. I think
nothing's sustainable unless you've got that.
Absolutely, and I think as long as it's done the right way, which I hope that people think we do, I think that there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm actually really, really proud of what we've created, and it certainly has not happened overnight. I mean, it is, again, that is something that started 8 years ago, and every single day it gets my attention, and that is the consistency required to do that is insane. It's on another level. My friends and Gemma, they think I'm a bit mad, and it doesn't feel like work to me because I'm so passionate about it and I enjoy it so much. But it's funny, the reason I really started it was because I was knocking about these other groups and communities on Facebook, and I was posting stuff, and I wasn't really even doing it with an agenda, but I can appreciate that if you post quite regularly, it can definitely seem like you do have an agenda. And perhaps there was, to an extent. We were looking to raise finance and things like that. But I would post about all the projects we were doing. And eventually what happened was I kind of got silenced in a lot of these groups.
No way.
Yeah, and they would sort of moderate my post, and then they would release the post at like 10 past 2 a.m. when, of course, nobody's on there and chatting. And I felt like, actually, why am I giving all of my value away?
Getting censored and cancelled.
Yeah, so I thought, you know what? The smart thing would, and actually I thought, they could cancel me, they could sort of turn me on mute, but actually they could just chuck me out of the group. And I thought, you know what? I better build my own land. I need my own land.
I'll go and play with my own sandpit.
Yeah, and so that's what I did. And it took me like 6 years to do it, but I did it, and now reaping the benefits. But I think we have an incredible community. I mean, we're about 7,000 now in the HMO community on Facebook. The level of engagement is
I'm part of that group. It's
unreal.
very good.
And I learn stuff every day. You know, there's this conversation about all sorts of things, legislation to, you know, the design and you know, and showing projects off and things like that. And I love it. And I really, really enjoy that part. And for me, that added benefit of just being able to share the stuff that I've learned and my experiences with other people and help other people. And we have helped a lot of people in the community. It's incredibly rewarding, and I really enjoy it, and have no intentions to stop that at all.
I'm very pleased to hear that. We met through our mutual friend Jade, who also runs the mastermind with you, and I'm very pleased that she introduced me to that because we get to meet as well. And I'm really, really a big fan of everything that you're doing. With regards to property people, that's what the name of this podcast. What characteristics, what traits do you think a property person needs to have to be successful in property?
I think you've got to be honest, and I think that can sometimes seem a lot harder than it is, especially when you're getting started. I think we look at so many people doing such great stuff, and we worry that we're not doing enough or we're not doing it good enough, and we try and pretend to be something else. And I think actually just being honest about who you are and what you're doing and what you've done is the best approach you could ever take. I think you need to be reliable. I think if you say you're going to do something, you have to do it right down to the fundamentals of I will be there at that time, and you know, I will send you this resort, whatever it is. I think it's incredibly important. I think you have to be risk orientated. You've got to be prepared to take a risk in this business. If you want to get the good deals, if you want to make them profitable, if you want to find the opportunities around the edge, you've got to be prepared to take risk. And that isn't for everybody. I don't think it's something that you can necessarily train yourself into. I think you can learn how to mitigate risks, but I think you've still got to be comfortable in taking risks as well. You've got to be prepared to work really hard. We've talked about the consistency piece. Combine that with just sort of working hard, and it does require a lot of work. And I think finally you've got to enjoy this whole process, because there's not enough time in life to do all of this stuff just to say you own a building at the end of it if you don't enjoy the process. So above all else, find a way to enjoy it. And I promise you, everything is so much easier if you can do it with a smile on your face. Every conversation, every negotiation, every deal that you get rejected on, it's just much easier to deal with if you can walk away with a smile on your face, you know?
Couldn't agree more. I think that's phenomenal advice. Andy, with HMO Awards and the Mastermind and the Roadmap, how can people find you if they want to reach out to you and be part of your community?
So the HMO community is our Facebook group. That's free. You can come and join that. Great place to find guidance and support and resources. It's very much about HMOs. If you want to learn about HMOs and take things to another level, we've got the HMO Roadmap. That's our online platform. It's just a huge vault of resources, videos, case studies from our community members, about 60 of them. We've got all of my resources that I use in my business that you can download, and a whole lot more. So you can go and join that. And I think at incredibly low cost, it's hugely valuable, and it's helping a lot of people in our community. The podcast, is a great place to come and listen to HMOs. So if you are into HMOs, you want to do more in HMOs, we're going to start getting into HMOs, come and check out the HMO podcast. 200 odd episodes now. You guys, or a lot of our community, just tune in every week to listen to me talk about HMOs, which still kind of blows my mind. But I think those are the places. And if you want to contact me directly, just drop an email to andy@thehmoroadmap.co.uk.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Andy. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
That's it.
Good man.
Cheers.
Good stuff.